Hello, everyone. This is the Flip team, Justin Norman and Shayo Foluio. First of all, a big thank you to VC Foray for having us again this year. For those who joined last year, the Africa Early Stage Investor Summit in 2020, you may have heard us. We had the opportunity to give a retrospective conversation both days, much like we do at the end of each episode of the Flip podcast. So we're back again and hopefully going to say something different this year. But Shayo and I also had the opportunity and the privilege to meet up at the local meetups last night. So I'm here in Cape Town, Shayo's in Accra. So it was fun to get to see some people in person, and too bad that this conference isn't in person, but hopefully next year. But yeah, we are glad to be here just to sort of recap the day and to talk a little bit about some takeaways that we had. And so I'm going to just, I guess, start, Shayo, on a little bit of a monologue, and then I'll throw it to you to get your perspective on that. But there's two things that I was thinking about today. One was, in listening to a conversation, with just talking about Future Active Africa Collective, he was talking about, a little bit about the types of companies that he invests in that are solving African problems, because, those are the problems that resonate with him. And, to some extent, foreign investors or foreign founders, it might be a little bit different just because of the context. So, it felt to me like a very sort of thesis-driven approach in terms of what are the problems that he knows really well and intimately, and wanting to back companies that are solving those problems. And then I was talking to an investor last night at here in Cape Town at the event, and this person was telling me, I asked them a question about what companies in their portfolio were particularly exciting, and this person was telling me about companies that were just had really high valuations and follow-on rounds. So it's very interesting that he was looking at it, purely from an economic perspective, which I guess investors are supposed to do. But it raised a really interesting question in my mind that I was thinking about. I want your perspective on, which is, just thinking about what works in this market, or what entrepreneurs need in terms of these sort of strong investor-driven, investor thesis-driven approaches versus whoever has velocity and can raise follow-on funding and obviously has some growth numbers behind it. That's what's important. So I've got some more perspective I want to ask about, but just initially, both as a founder and an investor, what have you been thinking about in the context of that question, in the context of, I guess, the pace of the ecosystem, the extent to which it's increased this year?
What's the question?
What do you think about it? Investor, thesis-driven approaches versus, whatever is going to make money, whatever is the follow-on investors are interested in.
That's a thesis now. Whatever's going to make money.
Is that a thesis you're saying?
For sure.
Yeah.
But I think I know where you're getting at. So I think for me personally, I think as a founder, it's maybe a bit easier. I think there's, to get up, dedicate all your time, energy, money, in a lot of cases, to a cause, you probably should believe not only that it'll make you money, but also that, it's a good way to spend your time. And so from a founder perspective, I think being, I don't know about, thesis driven, to be honest, but also just passionate about something and the problem that you see, or a solution that you think you can help usher into the world, generally comes from a place of, the kind of world you'd like to see exist. And for me, it's a lot to do with the importance and the passion I have for small service business, especially people that work with their hands, that we interact with on a daily basis, that are not empowered in the right way to become amazing. And I'm very passionate about that. You see, I start, what I'm like. I start getting very up about the stuff that I do. So from a founder perspective, I don't think it's very difficult at all to be thesis driven or to let your money time follow passion. I think from an investor perspective, it's really difficult. You're kind of especially at the early stage. I think anyone who's, and that's probably everyone here, spent time studying, reading, and investing. The things you're told at the early stage is you back people, and you back kind of spaces that that you think big things can come out of. So it's a lot of, at the very early stage, tends to be a lot about market size and people. And now the market size thing is a bit iffy in my opinion. I think no one knows what they're talking about, and then everybody kind of makes it up on whatever side, right? Depending on how I feel, the market might be big today, small tomorrow. But on the people side, I think that's where the interesting things start to happen, because generally what you should find really is that the things that you relate to, the things that you are also passionate about, the things that you think are important, you'll see in other people, right? And that's kind of where that those theses should really come into play, right? But whether that happens a lot of the time, I actually don't know. I think so. I think people, that people side of things, who you decide to back, who you decide to put your money behind, you're saying something about yourself, really. And I think we might get kind of a little crowded with the, it's a bit of a game, right? It's like, were you in this one? Were you in that one? It's a bit of that, but that's normal. I think that's just like what comes with it. But at the end of the day, when you're sitting across from someone who's, saying something that you relate to and that you see an opportunity for, and also is ushering a world that you also believe should exist, I think that's kind of where that magic of, thesis-driven investment comes from. We can be very smart about it, but at the end of the day, especially at that early stage, it's a lot of just, people stuff, soft stuff.
Yeah. Obviously, this year, especially fintech, and Nigerian fintech has been, increasingly hot, and maybe there's a little bit of a wind and a crowding in effect, to your point. But, we just published a couple of podcast episodes. One was a fintech series where we talked about, really one part of it was the challenge of fragmented regulation and the difficulty of, if fintech has this implicit need for scale, the difficulty of actually achieving scale in the context of, really difficult regulatory environments. And then we also did an episode on logistics, where we talked about the role that tech can play. But that, there's also just this huge infrastructure deficit. And in that case, how much of an impact can tech have, in the same way that how much of an impact can fintech have in a difficult regulatory environment. And so, that just has me thinking about, like, again, just to the point of thesis driven, whose role is it? Do we then expect, there's a lot of, foreign, FDIs and development banks who are involved in this African tech ecosystem. Like, what role do they have in sort of making it easier? I guess the question that I have is, like, there's what's hot, and then there's also these big things we're learning about, or I'm learning about, at least in terms of regulation, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of all of this other stuff that is absolutely necessary, but maybe no one's passionate about it, or maybe it's not, it doesn't carry with it the sort of excitement that or doesn't work on venture scale timelines or whatever. And so, I'm starting to have this question myself, and I'm curious to get your perspective on, like, maybe it's just thinking about it in ecosystems. Like, there's a role that VC has to play, and then there's a role that other people have to play. But I'm starting to question everything, I think, the more I know. And I don't know, or the more I learn, I suppose. And I don't know if you've got a perspective, especially as you're building an infrastructure business in South Africa, on, like, what ought to happen or what needs to happen, or if you've got different expectations for different types of investors, maybe not necessarily the VCs, but other types of investors that help to, in the case of SMEs, to create a greater enabling environment. Because, if that at the end of the day is what we're trying to achieve, for the development of the continent, that, like, a lot more needs to happen than just what we're talking about in these rooms that we talk often about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you said the answer, right? Different people play different parts. in that story. I think the what's hot thing is also cool. I mean, the what's hot thing is a lot of why I'm allowed to exist at this very moment. Like it's do you know what I mean? You give it one. How many episodes do you do on fintech this season?
Yeah, we did 3.
Counts, like it's what's hot is also important. So I think it's also like yeah, exactly as you said. Everybody has a different part to play in their different parts of the value chain or whatever ecosystem, whatever you want to call it. And actually, like as an entrepreneur, it's my job to go and find out who's playing where and make sure that they're part of the story where they're supposed to be, right? Some parts of my business, grant funding works really well. We can train up a bunch of people. We can help them learn soft skills for their business, etc., etc. That works well. But when we're talking about embedded finance, I need to go talk to E. You know what I'm saying? So like, it's different things, and everybody's playing a part. Could we be better at each of our parts? 100%. And I think these kinds of what's it called, forums and these kind of conversations is kind of what helps us get closer, I guess.
Yeah. So am I just being dramatic in terms of everyone has a role to play? It's not either or.
Well, I think it's cool. I think it's a cool conversation to have, in that you're kind of saying you're as you do so well, Justin. You're putting you're putting the mirror in front of us, right? Just kind of saying, okay, what's important? What are we here for? And if in one breath we're talking about a story about the great promise of Africa and enabled by this democratizing force that is technology to drive us forward and to retain our rightful place at the top of the world. We can't just be following what's hot. We have to make hard decisions. We have to look at hard places and look and do the hard things. And we have to come together to do that, because sometimes the incentives might not at once look very obvious, and kind of questioning us into what role we play in that journey. I think it's a cool conversation to have. That said, I'm just kind of being as I do so well, being the voice of reality. Like, it's not that simple. It would be nice if it were.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see, when I speak to the fintech guys and I talk about, they say they invested in a pre-seed such and such, and the valuations increased 100, 200%, since from the pre-seed to the seed. And then I think about, well, if I was going to be an emerging VC, or one day when I raise a fund, like, how does my strategy need to take into consideration the fact that, like, you can create some good liquidity for yourself on secondaries if you just get early enough on these hot deals, right? But then, the separate part is it feels a bit more thankless to take the long slog, the infrastructure, patient route, that necessary stuff.
Depends who you ask. It depends who you ask. Don't raise an infrastructure fund. I think those guys are doing okay. Like, it's depends who you ask.
That's true. Well, maybe this time next year we'll talk about what my investment thesis is, if I ever choose to.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Get in the game, mate.
Yeah, we'll do that. So, but I think that's it for today. Shayo and I are back tomorrow, so we'll leave it there. Hopefully, you guys, if you haven't listened to the episodes of The Flip that we referenced, you do so. Please do at theflip.africa.